Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madeline Blair, your host of Unlocked. You know, you cannot have a successful career if you don't know how to get over the unexpected. And Unlocked is a show all about opening the possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you've got options from which to choose. June is Effective Communication Month. To celebrate this, we're going to have a conversation on what it means to build community through the written word. And speaking of the written word, we'll finish today with a review of a book of impact. You know, you plan shows like this. I'm actually booking in October right now, which means I have 3 months of people lined up to speak to you. And then at the last moment, there's a storm in Texas. And so the person who was going to be on said, please, Madeline, I have to help the other people in my town. Can I postpone it? And I said, of course, take care of that town. So he'll be joining us later, not to worry. But today I have a wonderful person who has stepped in his place. And I'll tell you about him in just a moment. But I do want to give you a little bit of background. You know, the news that we get always seems to be from the world or from big cities. Yet the largest 50 companies own almost half of all papers. 6 corporations control 90% of the media outlets in America. And as a result, successes in small towns look small until you begin to add them up. Small towns have something to say, but their story is getting lost. Moreover, small towns need their own information about what is happening when decisions are being made. What happened in a community when it has its own local news? How does a community share its own knowledge so that neighbors can benefit? Does a local newspaper really make a difference? Can anyone write the news? We're going to be covering all of these questions and more from my guest, Michael Hillman. Michael, welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
I'll just give the audience just a quick briefing of a little bit about you, Michael, so that they'll get a sense of who you are. Michael literally wrote the U.S. Department of Energy textbook on readiness. He served as a founding member of a Department of Energy knowledge management community. He makes knowledge transfer a personal objective. And I want to tell you, Michael, that's really important to me because to me, personal knowledge management is absolutely key. He makes knowledge transfer the pursuit, a real pursuit. He always puts junior people in with senior people when he has teams, because he wants the junior people to be able to learn about the work, not just from books and from talking, but to see it in context. It really makes the learning difference. It's what he thinks of as knowledge transfer. He takes the same approach in his current incarnation as editor, or maybe it's executive director, of 2 local newspapers here in Maryland. He wants readers to have the news, but have it in a way that is understandable, so that the knowledge and insight can be gained to make the community stronger. I'm going to stop there, Michael, and let you join this conversation. Is there anything you'd like to add to that background before we get into things?
Well, what I like to tell the readers is where we actually met. I mean, there's always unanticipated variations in your road, and we met at a party. A friend that I wasn't going to come down because I was too busy putting out the next paper, and I took like an hour to drive down to see her, and you and I started talking, and it was sort of like, okay, we're talking, and then you mentioned knowledge management, and the minute you mentioned knowledge management, my ears went up. It's like, okay, I can talk to this person. And it's one of those things that, you know, being a nuclear engineer, one of the things we're always worried about is we've learned an awful lot about how to do things and how not to do things. And I can go through the list of accidents in nuclear facilities, but a lot of the accidents we averted because we knew about what we were doing. And so I've become very, very passionate about knowledge management and knowledge transfer. And it just so happens tomorrow night I'm going out to dinner with a young gal. I guess I can get away with saying that. Who I remember walking into her office one day, and she was sitting there, and she goes, "No one here likes me. Can you give me something to do?" And I saw in that kid something bright. And so I took her under my wings and spent the next 6 years just training her, putting her on teams and teaming her up with really, really, really smart people so that she got smart. And when I retired last year, I brought her in to see the deputy of the nuclear weapons complex, because I was running a very special project at that time. And I said, she's the person who can step in and take it where I left off. And they looked at her, and after interviewing her, they said, yep, she can do it. And because I took the time to transfer my knowledge to her, she stepped in on day one and has been incredibly successful. So it's up to the older folks to make sure we transfer our knowledge on to the next. And so even a newspaper is part of a knowledge transfer effort.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of which, how did you go from nuclear energy and decide to start a small town newspaper?
Do you want the long story or the short story?
Well, let's go with maybe the short one, because we only have a limited amount of time. And I know you have a great deal to say, Michael.
Well, as I tell people when I start the story, I flunked English in college. People have to understand that. I flunked English in college. I went to Villanova University, and the only reason I chose Villanova University was it was close to my house, so I could take a train to get there every day. But it was the only college that did not require you to take a foreign language. So I was an electrical engineer, and I had to struggle to take 2 courses in English in freshman year. And I remember the first paper I had to write was a single page, and the professor handed it to me and goes, "I'm giving you a D in this, but I really should just hand it back to you and throw it in the trash can because it's incoherent. But you're going to be an engineer, and you don't know how to write, and you don't need to know how to write." And that goes back to Sister Dola Reed at St. Margaret's when I was in grade school, who looked at me and said, "Forget English, you're good at math, focus on math, and everything will be okay." So my story is, when I went on to be a naval officer, ran nuclear submarines, and then went into work in the NRC. But if you gave me a mile of blackboards, I could give you every mathematical equation from the creation or the structure of the atom, to how it splits, to how the splitting heats water, to the generation of electricity, magnetic fields. I could give you everything in math, but ask me to write a single paragraph, and I would fail over it. So I was good at the math, but I wasn't good at communicating what the math meant. And I was approached by someone, and I just seeing the photograph. Or you actually won't see the photograph. I ride horses, and I was approached by someone who wrote in an equestrian magazine and said, "Would you write about competing?" And I said, "Sure, but my English is horrible." And she said to me, "Don't worry about that. We'll fix the English. But you're the writer. You have a story. Tell us the story." So I started writing just as I thought, and she corrected all the English, and that got me into writing to a certain degree. And I've always had good English editors, and what has been impressed upon me is that it's the story first. Get the story, someone will correct it.
Right.
But now it gets into the little interesting thing. How I got to run a newspaper, if you had asked me 15 years ago, would I be running a newspaper, I would have laughed. There's no way. I read newspapers, but I would never have been able to write one. But one night I logged into my website, and I saw something on a website about someone was claiming that the end of the world was going to come, and you're going to see 2 suns in the sky, and it was a local religious cult. And I had been following it for a while, but I didn't do anything about it because I just didn't really care, because I wasn't a member of the cult. But the more I read into it, the more it occurred to me that if you knew, for example, what was going to happen in Jonestown, would you have done something? Would you reached out to someone who was going to go down there and say that was wrong? Would you have reached out to the authorities? I mean, history teaches us a lot of things. Would you do something if you saw history happening again? This gets into knowledge management. So I sat down and and I remember distinctly, the first part was, I was sort of humorous about, no, there's not going to be two suns in the sky. And I wrote about contacting NASA and on and on and on. And then I went to bed, and while I was in bed, it occurred to me I missed the whole point. They were talking about, come to my local town in Emmitsburg, bring all your money, give us everything because the world is going to come to an end. And they're like, this is an end of the world cult in my hometown. So I went online and I did a 6 or part 7 dissertation of what happens to all the end of the world cults, and specifically picked out dead bodies to let people know these things always end badly. And then I sent it on to a theologian I knew who came back and said, Mike, you missed the whole point. Even Mary doesn't know when the end of the world's coming. This message came supposedly from Mary to someone in my town. And he goes, only God knows. So I published it online. And then when I came home from work that day, I probably had about 178 emails in my inbox. Half were from people going, thank God someone's saying something about this. And the other half were, you are wrong. You're a vile creature. And then I got a call from a local priest who came. It was really funny. He comes over to my house and he calls me up and goes, can I come over to your house? I said, sure. So Father O'Malley comes over to my house and sits down with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. And it occurred to me it was only 2 glasses. My wife was there, but he offered my wife a bottle of glass. So we opened the wine and he pours me a glass and he pours me, and he takes 1 glass. And he's quiet for about 5 minutes. I'm thinking, is this when I tell him I haven't been to confession in 25 years? What do I say? And he finally goes, Mike, I only have one question for you. Like, what? He goes, will you finish it? And I said, what? Finish what? He goes, I was sent here to put an end to this cult. It's still going on. You're the first one to call her a cult. Will you take her on? And so I thought about it and I said, okay, but you can't interfere because everyone was going to be nice. And one of the things you learn about cults is you can't be nice. I mean, it's an inbred thinking process. So I immediately went and pulled off my shelf. You talk about favorite books. I have the Federalist Papers, and I remember the Federalist Papers and how Madison and Jay went about the process of coming out every week with an article to promote the Constitution. So I said, I'm going to reach out to the 78 good people that said things to me and say, would you like to join me on this effort? And about 35 said yes. So over the next 3 months, every 4 days, we put something online where we deconstructed what the cult's message had been. Well, the short end of this, the fast end of this long story was that they came back and the newspaper was one of her advocates. And basically they went out of business because they started attacking all the local Catholics and the Catholic, were home to Mount St. Mary's College. They lost all their advertising and went out of business. So a couple of weeks later, I get a call from Father O'Malley. He goes, would you meet me at the president's office at Mount St. Mary's? So I go up to the president of Mount St. Mary's, and we're sitting there, and they're going, well, we need a local newspaper. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, we need a local newspaper. I'm just oblivious. I did what was asked for. The cult actually did collapse. The cult collapsed, and it was all over. And, interesting meetings with the cardinals and stuff like that, which I won't get into. It actually is a humorous story. If you ever go to the Our Lady of, forget it. It's years gone by. So I'm sitting there and Father O'Malley turns to me and goes, well, you need to run the paper. And I'm like, me? Why me? He goes, well, you're the one who brought the end of the collapse, the end of the cult. And they're like, well, you asked me to. And so I thought about it and I said, for a while, I'm sitting there and they're all looking at me. And I said, there's actually not a bad reason, because back in 1999, when the internet was getting up and going, I was writing a humor column for the old newspaper. And when they gave it up, they came to me and said, would you be willing to run the paper? And I said, no, the future is really in the internet. It's not going to be in print media. So I wanted to run an internet website, which we called emmitsburg.net. And that's where people are going to get the information. But what I realized quickly is that, yeah, I was getting viewers from all over the world coming to our site, but the local people didn't know what was going on. So I said, I'm going to use this newspaper, and I'm going to do the reverse. a lot of newspapers are going online to make money. And I was running this as a nonprofit, so it didn't matter. I didn't need money. I was going to take my website and make it a print version and do it on a monthly basis. So I said yes, but under one condition. I wanted the Mount St. Mary's English department to give me English majors because I still couldn't communicate and I couldn't write. And so Mount St. Mary's was really good, and they gave me English majors, and paper took off. It was first one was 18 pages, then it was 24 pages, then it was 36 pages, 40 pages, and now we are running 2 community papers, and this week I began work with another town who's basically came back and said, we want a newspaper. Can you give us content to help us get going? And I'm basically an advisor to that paper. But this morning I was answering all my emails from my Mount students and who I have empowered to run the paper. So I'm teaching these kids, how do you run a paper and what's the value of communication? So I stumbled. I never wanted to be a newspaper editor.
The beauty of that story, Michael, is that you knew what your limitations were,
right,
and you knew how to fill that up. And the fact that you have them running it, so they're not just learning journalism, they're learning journalism in context of putting out a newspaper, which makes a big difference.
And the nice thing is the students, they all get paid, which you talk to most English majors, they never expect to get paid. They get paid, and they are so used. I just wrote an epistle. I had a horse who injured himself, and he's been in the vet hospital now since November. I just got the word he's going to be okay. Finally, it's been a long haul, but I just wrote the story, and I just said to the students, I know you can't drink beer, but do something before you read this because it's Mike Hillman's stream of consciousness, and you're probably going to take a week trying to fix all the errors. But I am so good at just releasing the paper to them and trusting them. And the thing that's the most important thing is you got to trust them. If they make a call, you deal with it. And we have a little game we have, and this is a fun story I'd like to tell. I was driving home, and what I do is I pick the papers up from the printer office and I go to the post office to drop them off. And we had a former mayor and a World War II vet who died. So our lead story was, about this mayor and World War II vet. And as I'm driving back, I look down at the floor of my truck, and what I see on the headline is World War I, WW1 vet and former mayor dies. And I'm just thinking to myself, oh my God, I have looked at that paper for a week, and it never clicked in my mind it was World War I, not World War II. I mean, everyone in World War I was long since dead. So every month we go to the Mount St. Mary's meeting, and all the students get together, and I usually put anywhere from $20 to $40 on the table. And I say, okay, find the errors. And so everyone struggled. Then one found that when I finally said World War I. But I always basically reinforced to the kids, it's okay to make mistakes. Yeah. That's how we learn, And I tell people when it's in print, it's okay. It's done. We're done. All we can do is get better next time. And so I think the students, in fact, one of the things I really thought about is having some of my students join in on this and listen to it, because I want them to understand they have to reach out sometimes, go beyond their comfort zone and try. And there's no fault if you fail. If you only fail if you don't try. And that's the important thing.
That's right. And you never learn if you don't try. And you always, if you pause, you can learn a great deal from your errors.
Right.
And mistakes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about how you got the community to buy into your idea, but I think you told that story. I think you covered that really well. Get the community to ask you.
The most interesting thing about my paper is I think a lot of people think along the lines of a newspaper where lots of ads in there and Sally cuts Sue's hair, or Sally gave locks of hair, or the trivial things that you see in the local newspaper. I read to be informed. Yeah. And the paper that I subscribed to for a long, long, long time was the London Financial Times. So when I started the newspaper up, I actually reached out to the London Financial Times and said, could you please send me your style guide? And they sent me their style guide. And that's the guide we use. So when you read the paper, we actually use spelling based upon English spelling. So color is not COLOR, but it's COLOUR.
Yeah.
And it's a little while for people to do that. But what I've challenged the students to do is most newspapers are written at a fourth grade level, right? And they're short little sound bites. I write my paper at a high school level, if not college level. And I tell the students, you write up to people. You know, the idea is if you look at our masthead, you have to bear with me as I turn left. The one movie that really really has stuck with me is the story about Edward R. Murrow and Good Night and Good Luck. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that movie.
Mm-hmm.
But on our masthead is exalting the importance of ideas and information. That is the thing that we have underneath our masthead. The fact, the newspaper needs to bring ideas and information to the readers. So we have an ecology hour. You know, most newspapers have an astrology column. We have an astronomy column. We have a science column. We have an ecology column. So I want people, when they pick it up, to be exposed to things that they're never going to be exposed to in any other newspaper.
You know, it's interesting. As you talk like that, I'm thinking about raising children. And one of the ways in which children learn how to speak the language is they listen to the people around them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing about, and they say also read to your child, because that also expands the vocabulary. And what you're doing, I don't mean to compare your audience with children, but we are always learning if we have the opportunity. And what you're doing is you're giving them the opportunity to elevate their language.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've watched society, and we say that we've been dumbed down over the years. Mm-hmm. And I want to, in my own little small way, reverse it. I struggle with the fact that sometimes I wonder if my paper would be better received in a different community. I mean, I'm a New Englander, so I think I write like a New Englander, where you have a different mindset. Yet at the same time, I get emails and calls from old English teachers who go, "You have no idea how nice it is to pick up this paper and read this paper cover to cover." And the best compliment, I mean, there's lots of little stories. I'm glad. Too bad we don't have more hours, because I could go for hours on this. I remember a mayor who contacted me and goes, "Mike, your paper's too hard to read. Could you use less two-syllable words?" And I mean, he didn't say 3 syllables, he said 2 syllables. And I'm like, how do you do 2 syllables? So the next time I saw the mayor, I went out and I gave him a coloring book and crayons. He said, "Is this more suitable for you?" And I'm like, I'm not going to dumb it down. The best compliment I get from people, this is a monthly paper, is, "I just finished your last paper." And the next one came in. So where a lot of the local community papers, when you get them, you're done, you throw them in the trash. There's just too much to read. In fact, people go, "There's just too much to read." It's like, that's the point. It's a reading paper. And I don't focus on advertising. I mean, the paper makes money enough to pay everyone. I don't sit there and think about, how do I get ads? What I do is create a quality paper, and the ads will come to it, because people know that stays around.
Now, I think people ought to know some of the statistics about your paper. What I read about you is that you began with about 4,000 readers, and you have 14,000 readers now.
No. 14,000 just for the one paper, another 12,000 for the other, so we got 26,000 readers. We cover all of what's called Northern Frederick County. So for those who aren't familiar with the Washington, D.C. area, Frederick is the next major city north of Washington. So between Frederick all the way up to Gettysburg, and we cover everyone in that. So we go up from the old-time farmers to the people who can telecommute from Washington and Baltimore who live in our area. So we're up to 26,000. And with the other Brunswick News Journal that's about to open up, we'll probably at that stage be pushing to about 34,000 people.
That's fantastic. Yeah. You know, another thought occurred to me as you were talking about this, is that when you constantly dumb down, you are making an assumption about the readers. Not that they Not that they don't have to work harder to read it, but that they don't have the capacity to do that, when in fact, they have the capacity once you give them the opportunity.
Right, you do. You do. And I and again, one of the things I struggled with early on, and this is where I have to listen to my students, is I didn't have any sports in my newspaper because I don't have any kids, so I don't deal with sports. I mean, I write about riding horses, but there's only so many people who want to read about riding horses. And the students came to me and said, we need to put in sports articles. And I'm like, I don't want sports articles. I don't care. And they're like, no, you need sports articles for a certain. Again, it's like going into a store. You have to have something to draw people in, and while you're in there, you expose them to things. And that's the best way to describe it. Like someone came back and said, you have nothing for mothers. Again, but I don't care. Well, no, you have to have things for families and mothers. So it's like, okay, fine. We'll get someone to do it, and we write it. Do I read those articles? No, I don't read those articles because I'm not interested in it. Yeah. But people are interested in it.
Yep.
And here's the thing that I people don't necessarily know unless they've read the paper for a long time. In my paper, if you want to say, why do I write this paper? I do it for 2 pages, 2 specific pages. It's the commentary section. And I have some really, really, really good political thinkers. And on those 2 particular pages, there have never been ads. And it goes back to the London Financial Times. If you go to the commentary section of the London Financial Times, they dedicate 2 pages to really good political commentary where there is no ads at all. So for the 15 years I've been running this paper, those 2 pages have been ad-free. And we go in and we bring in front of our readers things that they really need to hear. And a lot of it obviously has been what's been going on nationally in this country, but we have a conservative and we have a liberal and we have a Republican and we have a Democrat who write for us. And I never ask them what to write about, but they always come up with really good thinking process. And what I challenge them to do is you need to win the idea war, but you need to win it on your own terms, and you need to win it with words. And everyone's given 1,200 words every month to write. And it's amazing when people come back and go, I never thought about that. I never thought about that. I never thought about it. So I had an old man calling me up and he wanted to know where, unfortunately I have to get into politics a little bit. He goes, where's your Trump article? Because he was reading about an article about Tucker Carlson being basically thrown out of Fox News. And I'm there like, we don't write a Trump article. We don't have any Trump articles. We have just articles that we think are important. And he was completely oblivious to the fact about the defamation suit from Dominion Voting, which that article was all about. He goes, that never happened. I said, oh, yes, it did. And I pointed him stuff. This old man called me back the next day and goes, how come I didn't know about this? How come I had to wait for my local community paper to tell me about something like that? Mm-hmm. And so what I'm trying to do is there's an echo chamber out there. Everyone's in their own echo chamber. I'm trying to break outside that echo chamber and say, this is the real news. And so I live for those 2 pages. And if I get people to come in, if they're going to read the sports, I don't care. They have to flip by to read those commentary and something's going to pick them up. And if I get one person a month to change some of their thinking process, then it's a win.
Fantastic. Yeah. I want to change gears just slightly.
Okay.
I worked with the USDA to help them capture the knowledge of senior staff before they moved on from the agency or perhaps were promoted to another position. We called it knowledge transfer, knowledge retention.
Right.
You saw the need to bring junior staff into meetings with senior staff to learn firsthand. What prompted you to do this?
You know, I never really thought much about it until I started thinking about getting ready to retire. And it gets back to, I've seen so many people retire and then they walk out the door and the knowledge is lost. And you know, here's an example. At one of our facilities, we had a problem where the term is a pin, you know, that it's part of what makes a bomb go back. Uranium, and they put someone walked by and they opened a secure closet and found 2 of them in that particular closet where you're only supposed to have 1.
You said something, a word that I could not understand, and it's exactly those two things that you saw. Could you say that again?
Called a pit. It's like it's a round device, And the way a nuclear bomb works, and I can say this without having to worry about getting into security, is you compress either uranium or plutonium into a very small mass, at which time it goes supercritical, and then you get the bang. And so it's a certain one. And someone was telling me the story that they have found that they have put two of these things, and you want to keep them separated for obvious reasons. You don't want to put too much uranium and plutonium together, or you get a bang. And so he said, well, we put some controls in place to make sure we didn't put two in a closet again. And one of the things they put in the controls were they were going to keep the doors open, so as you walk by, you could see that there's only one in. Well, about 6 or 7 years later, someone said this was a tripping hazard. So they had forgotten why the doors were open. So they went back and they changed the procedures to close the door. Well, what do you know? 3 months later, someone opened the door and found out there was two was in there. So we lost the knowledge. The biggest problem I saw, and which is something I did not want to do, knowledge is power. You have to understand this. Knowledge is power. It has always been power. And as I like to go back and talk about, how do we get into the dark ages? Everyone wonders, we had the dark ages. We got into the dark ages because we were controlled by guilds. And if you think about it, the guilds, to get into the guilds, you had to do something this very specific way. Well, I think about everything that I've learned over the years, what I was able to pass on was maybe 50%. So if you think in the terms of a guild, each guild master could pass on 50% of what he learned. Pretty soon you couldn't think, because you couldn't change anything outside of what the guild taught you. Otherwise, you were thrown outside the guild. So all the great knowledge we had in the Roman and the Greek area got lost because it was not being passed down by each guild master, the next guild master, the next guild master. So what I thought about is, okay, I'm going to spend the time to try to break the idea that knowledge is power. Because I saw really smart guys who would say, I'm not going to tell you what I know. Because if I tell you what I know, then I'm not needed anymore. And if you think about it, Google. Look at what Google is. Google is valued at what, $1 trillion, somewhere in that. But all they really have is server farms. I mean, how much are all the server farms that Google has really worth if you added up the equipment? Maybe $1 billion worth of server farms. But the other $999 billion in Google's value is in their ability to transfer knowledge. They are focused on transferring knowledge. So what I decided to do, my value was going to be on focusing on transferring knowledge. And I gathered around myself people that were the same like mind, and we all agreed we were going to transfer our knowledge. So we look out for younger people who want to learn. We give them opportunities to succeed and fail. And when they fail, we take responsibility. And when they succeed, we give them the responsibility. And it was just, I wanted to be something more than just a guy who left. And I look at the people that, and I'll use the term, Morgan Lucky. She's my pride and joy. She really is my pride and joy. And I look back on all my years in the Department of Energy and the weapons complex, and it was being able to help Morgan get to where she was that, to me, made it all worthwhile. So it wasn't the paycheck. It was helping Morgan Lucky.
You have such an in-depth understanding of the real value of knowledge.
Yeah.
Not everyone does, so I'm applauding you on that.
The other thing is a lot of my knowledge transfer comes from me. I compete horses, and I used to compete horses, and I've had some incredibly talented coaches who have been on the Olympic teams, and all of riding and being a good rider is about knowledge transfer. Being able for your coach to be able to teach you what they know. But when I tell my students when they come, because I teach, I tell them that you will never be like me. There's no way that you will be able to take everything I'm teaching you and internalize it the way I internalize it, because of the fact that when someone says to me, "Go on," I remember a Bruce Davidson or a Julie Ganina telling me that in front of a fence. And so I remember what that analogy is, and it clicks in my mind. When I tell someone to go on or kick on or something about a horse, they're just listening to me, but they don't understand why they understand why I'm doing it, but they don't have it the same rationale. So what I tell them is, I'm going to teach you everything I know. So you will never ride exactly like me, but my goal is for you to ride better than me. So you're going to take everything I get you, but what I want you to do is never stop learning. And that was something someone told me. Julie told me, who was a fantastic coach. The minute you stop taking riding lessons is the minute you need to stop riding, because now you're just wasting your time. And even at 67, I still take riding lessons. My current coach, I remember her in diapers. And, she was the one that I would walk in with in the show jumping arena, and I had to hold her hand because she was so nervous. And so I had to get her through the show jumping. And now I look at her and say, okay, now your job is to hold my hand, because I don't want to jump the big fences, but I want to challenge myself and I want to have fun. So your job is to make me have fun. But I still take riding lessons because I remember the statement: the minute you stop taking lessons is the minute you're done. So the minute you stop learning, you're never too old to learn.
One of the things that I discovered in my research on highly resilient people was that they were not only had deep knowledge themselves, but they were insatiably curious. So they were always in learning mode.
Right.
So this is the kind of thing that it not only keeps you competent, it actually makes you more resilient to meet the next challenge. In fact, my next question was, what are the benefits of focusing on knowledge transfer? And I think we may have covered that, unless you have anything you want to add to that. Because I'm thinking it goes back to your earlier comments about what you did with the newspaper to get the community educated. What are some of the results you've seen of beginning to really bring news to the local people?
An awareness in town government. Like, for example, one of the issues that we've been dealing with is planning and zoning. Most people don't recognize there's a planning and zoning commission in almost every town. And we had an issue in a local adjoining town where there was an annexation taking place, and people got all upset over the annexation that was going to take place. And I realized that the newspaper hadn't been covering planning and zoning. So we've now shifted the focus of that every edition has a segment on planning and zoning of what's coming down in the future in each paper. So people are more aware of what's going down, so they can't turn around and say, we didn't know. But what I'm finding is people are more aware of what's actually happening in the town. They're thinking ahead. We had an individual who was going to try to sneak a shooting range inside town limits. I mean, imagine a shooting range inside the town limits. And we didn't politicize the story. We just laid it out.
Yeah.
That the person is going to attempt to put it, and we got that out of the planning and zoning. Well, there was such an uproar because people were like, oh my God, this guy's going to have a shooting range. So at the next planning and zoning meeting, the place was packed because people were like, we're aware. Sure, it was on the town's Facebook page. It was like, it was interesting. One person goes, well, I saw it on the Facebook page, but I thought, and we all shared it with each other. We thought someone was going to do something about it, but no one did something about it. It's like, well, then you got to do more than just share Facebook pages. Yeah. So what I'm seeing is more awareness in local government affairs, activities, and we're helping a lot of the nonprofits in the communities get their word out. I mean, I got the Lions Club in the adjoining town who says, we're struggling to get our word out. Can you give us free space? And so every month we give them half a page of free space just to get the word out so they can tell people what they're doing. So I'm seeing people return to the old form of where they actually have the idea, because in Facebook, and by the way, I will tell everyone, I hate social media. I mean, my students, they said, the newspaper needs a Facebook page. I'm like, why? Why do we need a Facebook page? We got a website, which I don't even go to, but we have the newspaper. in Facebook, you can ignore stuff, as I said, emails are useless too because emails go away. You can ignore them. But when you have a paper, people are flipping through it, and they will see something that will catch their mind, whether it's a pet for adoption, a charity event that's coming up, or news or a meeting that's coming up on the town affairs. Even right now, we're getting an election that's coming up in my local town. The election is not until September, but I'm writing a lead story on the election to let people know the election is coming up. We're going to have to elect a new mayor. We're going to have to elect 2 council members. Start thinking about it now. If you want to run, you need to run now. Because up until now, what's been happening is we've been lucky if 30 people show up to vote in a town of 2,000 citizens, right? We need to get it up more to 800-900 people. So I want to put that word out so people can start thinking in advance. So it's more what's happening more than anything else is awareness of what's going on in your community.
So would you do it again? Set up a local newspaper.
That's an interesting story. Yes, absolutely. I would do it again only because, and you can't see it, of the students.
Yes.
Of the students, I mean, I wanted to wring their necks last night because they were a little bit on the late side, and I finally got a whole plethora of articles in that the way it works is articles come in, especially if I write it, then we send it on to someone who does readability editing. They don't do English editing, but they do. Does it make sense? And they'll come back to me and say, Mike, that doesn't work. And by the way, all my news reporters are mothers, fathers who are looking for some extra paperwork. So none of them are English majors, but they know what's important. And then we send it on to my own students, and they do the editing and for English and grammar. And it came in last night, and I was like, because literally I go to press tomorrow night for the July edition, and my layout guy's coming back saying, okay, now you need to cut like 300 words because you've got 3 articles that they can't fit in. I'm like, oh God, couldn't these students be a little bit faster? But they were so good, and it's so fun to watch their reactions, and to know that they actually think of this as their own paper. And when I watch them graduate, I still stay in touch with them. They still email me back and talk about how, this made a big difference in their lives because most of them got really good jobs because, one came back and said, I was able to say I was an editor of a paper, 48-page paper that went to 14,000.
You gave them real experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Besides that, I could make me laugh.
Yeah. Well, now we're ending kind of on the written word.
Okay.
So I want us to segment into that final segment, which normally I do alone, but to my audience, I invited Michael because he's has difficulty with English as a written form, and I can tell you, I started my career in mathematics, so I understand that one very much. So I've asked him to share with you as well a book of impact. Now we have only about 5 minutes to do this, the two of us. So would you like to begin, Michael?
I'll let you begin because I can talk 20 minutes. So that way you'll limit how much I can talk about.
Excellent. All right. Well, I have a kind of different book today, but I think it's suitable to what we've been talking about. The book is called Among Flowers. It's poems by Susan Kinsolving. Now, I do a lot of facilitation of groups so that they can accomplish particular goals. But there's one particular design that I have used for many years because clients keep coming back and asking for it. And it's called Stories Inside Words. Because if you're writing a mission statement, you need to be able to say, these are the words we want to choose to describe what our mission is. But moreover, we want people, at least us, to have a common understanding what those words are. And so I ask people to actually tell stories inspired by words. But I kick it off with poetry, because in poetry, you begin to understand the power of word. So I'm going to read you the opening poem to the process called Stories Inside Words. It's called Not a Still Life. A mixed bouquet may mediate among colors and shapes, make sense of so many sensibilities. See the nasturtiums fan and restrain their small flames, and the zinnia composes a full circle of kisses and contusions covered with pink tears as sweet peas intimate a sheen of skin. Where do flowers end and begin? Ancient and infamous, they swarm with bees and all illusions that are alive, blooming and being. When people hear that, they wonder why I'm giving them poetry. By the end, they want more. So that's the book that really gave me an inspiration to use poetry in my work. Michael.
When you actually asked me that, I struggled because what you can't see in my room is I'm in my library, and every book for me has value. And I thought about it initially. In fact, I had one of my students wrote a story in the last edition of the paper of the value of an old book. And I was thinking, okay, do I do the Federalist Papers? Do I do Burr's Trial? I mean, I've got the Harvard classics in my room. I mean, all the books are valuable. And then it occurred to me, I said, there was one book that got me going. And I'm going to show it to you. This is volume 1. Okay, if I can get it over here, you can't see it.
Yeah.
And I got it in Nova Scotia when my wife and I were on a trip. And it's called The Book of Days by Robert Chambers. And it was written in 1863. And it's everything a Scottish aristocrat needed to know for culture. So on and it's a book a day. So you go January 1st. It takes you through everything that happened on January 1st. Literally a story, maybe anywhere from 1,800 words to 2,400 words. And it'll have like 7 or 8 stories that are applicable to January 1st. Then you go to January 2nd, then you go to January 3rd. So if you pull up you want to go to your birthday, it'll tell you what saints were born on that day, what was of interest on that day. And it took me, I sat down and forced myself for an entire year before I went to bed, I read that book and read that particular entry that day. And it enlightened me on things that we have as a society had forgotten about that made society great at the time. So what I ended up doing is it was so good that I said, I'm going to digitize this. So I actually went through and I did an OCR and I worked with mountain students over 3 years. And if you go to thebookofdays.com, no ads on it, don't worry about it, it's all free, thebookofdays.com, you can click on your birthday and find out what happened on that particular birthday. And it was just one of those things that was such a fun project. One of the things I wanted to do when I decided to hand the paper over to someone else is I'm going to reread that book all over again because it got me thinking about what knowledge we had lost in society and what knowledge really was important. I mean, Twitter posts, Facebook posts, all those things are completely and totally irrelevant to what the Scottish nobleman thought was important in 1863. And what he thought was important is still very much important. That's my 2 cents.
Michael, I can't thank you enough for a really rich conversation. I wonder if you have just a couple minutes of final words for us.
And I do. And what I want to reinforce to everyone is what I was told by that first person who encouraged me to write. Don't be afraid of writing. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about syntax. You have a voice. Learn just to write, even if it's stream of consciousness. Because if you can't write, you're going to fail. You're going to fail in communicating your ideas. You're going to fail in communicating your lessons learned. I tell people that, I'm a nuclear engineer. Nuclear engineers are a dime a dozen. However, nuclear engineers who actually can communicate are worth their weight in gold. I look at my Mount St. Mary's majors who are English and communications majors, and their parents are probably pulling their hairs out saying, okay, what are my kids going to do with an English major? Yeah. And I'm like, you guys are invaluable because you know how to communicate. You then, when I had a team and we were all putting together a report on the start of a nuclear activity, it was my English majors that were critical because I can get the engineers to write, but it didn't make any sense. It was the English majors that could make sense. And if you can't communicate, your ideas are lost. So practice, just sit down and write. As I tell people, the simplest thing to do is write about taking your dog for a walk. Sit back and tell me about taking your dog for a walk. That gives you an idea of writing. Don't be afraid to try. And if you try, time will go on. You get better and you get better and you're going to get better. There's always an English major out there that can always fix it to make it work. But you have ideas. And it's important that you share those ideas.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on this podcast.
You're most welcome.
All right.
Well, speaking of thank you, I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and that you learned something new. And if you're curious about the background of this show, check out my book, Unlocked. Discover how to embrace the unexpected. It's available on Kindle, audio, and paperback. And if you would like to explore what it means to build and nurture your resilience with me as your mentor, send me an email. I'll get right back to you and we'll schedule a conversation. So, what was it that you learned today from today's show? Make a comment in social media. I know Michael doesn't like social media, but let's use it anyway. Write down what you learned and what you'll do differently as a result. And if you're on YouTube, click the like button. And if you haven't done so already, why don't you subscribe? I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.